This week in IT, it's all about security. Microsoft is in talks to buy Mandiant, potentially making it unrivaled in the cybersecurity space. Windows Active Directory gets an out-of-band fix, and learn how to protect your organization against a new Azure Active Directory multiphase phishing attack. This week, Microsoft is reportedly in talks to buy cybersecurity firm Mandiant. Now, neither company has actually confirmed or denied this rumor at this stage, but several media outlets this week reported on this. So Mandiant has a cybersecurity solution called Advantage Platform, and it's similar to technology that Microsoft already has if you think along the lines of Microsoft Defender and Advanced Threat Intelligence and Azure Sentinel, for instance. Now, why would Microsoft want to buy a company like Mandiant, you might ask, if Microsoft already has most of this technology already in place? Well, I think the answer there is possibly the expertise in cybersecurity that Mandiant has, because whenever there's a large-scale security threat, Mandiant is often called in to do the post-attack intelligent work and triage and to really investigate what happened, how it happened, and how it can be cleaned up and prevented in the future. And it's that expertise which Microsoft, while it does have to a certain extent, could actually really benefit from if it was to acquire Mandiant. Now, if you imagine that Microsoft, of course, has more than 1.4 billion Windows 10 and 11 devices around the globe, and if you were able to combine all of the threat information that Microsoft's able to collect from those devices, combine that with the experience that Mandiant has in cybersecurity, you can probably create a fairly significant force in that field. Now, this should put maybe AWS and Google in a position where they might need to start worrying, because as we know, in recent years, Microsoft has really been doubling down on security and making that a key selling point of really everything that they do in the cloud. So while Azure, of course, is way behind AWS, they are growing that platform really quickly. And if they can put themselves in a position where they're able to offer the best security solution on the market, then that could pose a more serious threat, of course, to AWS. So there was quite a lot of interest in another story this week because Microsoft released, just before this week's Patch Tuesday updates, an out-of-band fix for Windows Server Active Directory. After the January Patch Tuesday updates, customers started to report that some .NET applications were starting to fail because if those applications queried Active Directory trust information or decided to set that information, they would throw an error. Now, this has affected some corporate .NET applications, and Microsoft has issued this out-of-band fix to address this issue. So you don't really need to install this fix at the moment unless you're facing this particular problem. And because this is an out-of-band update, you're either going to have to install it manually or import it into Windows Server Update Services or Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Initially, Microsoft released this fix just for Windows Server 2022, 2019, and 2016. But now the fix is available still as an out-of-band update for all supported versions of Windows Server. So Microsoft reported this week about a new multi-phase phishing attack against Azure Active Directory, and they issued some advice about how you can prevent it. So I'm just going to tell you briefly about how it actually works, and it's actually quite simple. So what the attackers did is they sent out phishing emails containing a DocuSign document, which required you to log into office.com in order to be able to view that document. Now, they sent the users, of course, to a fake office.com login page, automatically populated the login field with the username, and then just asked them for the password. And because it all looked very authentic, of course, lots of users just put their password in, and lo and behold, what happened? Of course, their passwords were compromised. Now, what this allowed the attackers to do was a couple of things. First of all, using Exchange Online PowerShell, they were able to use those credentials to basically block certain kinds of messages coming through to that user's compromised mailbox. So any messages that had junk or spam or any notifications from the user's IT department to help make sure that the user wasn't suspicious that there was something wrong. The next thing they were able to do was take one of their own Windows 10 or Windows 11 devices and use Outlook to register that device with Azure Active Directory. Because during the first launch experience with Outlook, you get asked, do you want to register this device with your tenant? And the answer can be, of course, yes or no. You just click yes, and lo and behold, that device is now registered in Azure Active Directory. Now, once they were able to get access to a real, genuine mailbox on that network, of course they could send their phishing campaign much wider. So they could basically compromise potentially hundreds or thousands of mailboxes. And they did this by sending a PDF, which again directed them to a fake SharePoint site, and they were asked to enter their password. Microsoft has pointed out that just resetting the user's password isn't enough when the attacker has already got the device registered with Azure Active Directory, because they can have persistence on that device. So how do you prevent all of this happening in the first place? Well, if those organizations had had two-factor or multi-factor authentication in place, of course they would never have been able to use the credentials that were stolen to log into Outlook. So that's the first thing. And Microsoft also recommends that you add a conditional access policy to Azure Active Directory to make sure that device registration requires a multi-factor authentication, that you can't just register a device with a username and password. Other things that you can do are, of course, to disable basic authentication. And if you've enabled security defaults in your Azure AD tenant, that should already be disabled by default. The other thing that you can do is restrict access to Exchange Online PowerShell. Now, you can either create a list of users in a text file and block their access to Exchange Online PowerShell, or you can filter users by attribute. So for instance, you could block anybody who doesn't have an attribute of, well, we work in the IT department or something along those lines. So if you have a hybrid cloud set up with Windows Server, Active Directory and Azure AD, or whether you're purely in the cloud with Azure AD, it's important to make sure you think about how you're going to protect your Azure AD accounts. Of course, multi-factor authentication, Microsoft recommends, is the most effective way to do that, and you can avoid these kinds of problems. If you found the video useful, then please give it a like to help more people see it on YouTube. And if you want to see more of these weekly roundups for IT pros, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you next week.